All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dunk on AP podcast. Today we're going to be dunking on APUSH, talking about period one still. This is actually the last pod in the period one series because period one is just not worth as much of the test. Today we're going to be talking about European exploration when it actually arrives at the Americas. Last time we talked about the American continent up to the year 1492. So now we are going to be talking about when Europeans actually got here. So remember that European exploration in so many ways was spurred on by the Renaissance, which was a period, really an outburst of scientific and artistic activity in Europe from 1401 to roughly 1600. In this, you get the invention of the printing press, and that leads to the spread of knowledge and biblical literacy across Europe. Namely, it leads to the spread of the Bible and biblical literacy, and people starting to question the teachings of the Catholic Church. So through this, you get splits. So when more people can read a mass-produced Bible, more people can interpret it in different ways and start to have issues because of it. Splits within Christianity play a massive part in the founding of America. So keep a close eye on that. So who's here and what do they want? Let's start with Spain, because really Spain is, at least at first, the most important part of the people that are coming and exploring the Americas. So 1400 Spain was split into small kingdoms. The two largest were Castile, with Catholic Queen Isabella, and Aragon, who with the Catholic King Ferdinand. In 1469, they marry, and together they drove out Islamic influence in Spain by 1492. That same year, they sent a guy named Christopher Columbus on his first voyage. The king and queen then set up a Catholic dynasty. So under Ferdinand and Isabella, there is new leadership, hope, and power for Europeans who follow the Roman Catholic faith. And remember that Spain visits the Americas and conquers parts of the Americas for the three G's: God, gold, and glory. So over in Northern Europe, you've got a newly formed group of Christians called Protestants, because Martin Luther has nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, and they are protesting the authority of the Catholic Church and some of its practices in the Protestant Reformation. This creates all kinds of violence and turmoil in Europe, but also creates missionary zeal for the spreading of both sects of Christianity, Catholicism and Protestantism. So now we've got a large group of Christians looking for a place to go and practice their religion freely. So that's the religious lay of the land, but remember that settlers didn't just come for religious reasons, they also came for financial reasons. Trade with Africa, India, and particularly China was big money for European countries. The trade route formerly used was blocked by Ottoman Turks in 1453. Now we need a better route to China in that sweet, sweet trade. So in this time, you do have the slave trade happening out of Africa, particularly West Africa, but not nearly to the level that it will be. People in Europe, Africa, and Asia had enslaved people caught in war since ancient times. The Portuguese started trading for slaves from West Africa in the 15th century and working them on sugar plantations off the African coast. These early enslaved Africans did resist by running away, sabotaging the work, and revolting. We'll get to the slave trade more so in future lessons, really not that far from now. Now, Christopher Columbus, let's talk about him really quick. Born in 1451 in modern-day Italy, nearly dies in 1476, but he makes it, so therefore he makes a pretty big discovery after that. He spent 8 years seeking support for his trip to what he called the Indies. In 1492, the king and the queen of Spain, they agree to fund his voyage, and Columbus receives 3 ships in an agreement that he would govern all lands that he would claim for Spain. After sailing from the Canary Islands on September 6th, Columbus landed on an island in the Bahamas on October 12th. So his next 3 voyages would be unsuccessful. He actually does die thinking that he has discovered a faster route to Asia. But in reality, Columbus discovered what would come to be called the New World. He definitely didn't discover Asia. And so whether or not he was a failure or not kind of depends on your view of what he accomplished. Historically, there is no debating, though, that he did change the game forever, notably because of something called the Columbian Exchange. The contact between the Americas and Europe, a transfer of plants, animals, and germs from one side of the Atlantic to the other for the very first time. So some of the things that were exchanged, just notable ones, going from the Americas to Europe, Africa, and Asia, you had squash, pumpkins, turkeys, peanuts, potatoes, tomatoes, corn. You also had things like peppers, tobacco, pineapple, cacao, beans, and vanilla. Then coming from Europe Africa and Asia to the Americas. You had things like onions, olives, turnips, coffee beans, peaches, fruits, citrus fruits. You had grapes, bananas, sugarcane, honeybees. You had grains like wheat, rice, barley, oats. You had livestock like cattle, sheep, pigs, and horses. But then, most notably, you had disease like smallpox, influenza, typhus, measles, malaria, whooping cough. All that stuff gets introduced to the American continent. Natives had no immunity and millions die. Diseases contracted from Europeans had a 90% mortality rate. Now, an important term to remember here, the line of demarcation. This was the north-south line drawn down a map by the Pope, giving all land to the west to Spain and all land to the east to Portugal. Europe is definitely going to have something to say about this line. Now, Spain has a secret weapon in exploring the Americas, and that is the Spanish conquistadors. They were explorers and conquerors who discovered and took over massive amounts of territory in Mexico and South America. The riches they found increased the gold supply by more than 500% in Spain, making Spain one of the richest nations in the world. And the rest of the world is going to be looking at that and saying, "Hey, we need to get in on that new world life because of an idea called mercantilism." Mercantilism is the economic idea that a country's wealth is measured by the amount of gold that it owns. The goal of mercantilist economic policy is to export more goods than you import, so that you bring more money into the country you send out to than you send out to other nations. You always want to be up in mercantilism. Now, the encomienda system was how the Spanish were exploiting the labor of the natives. So this was a Spanish labor system that rewarded conquerors with the labor of particular groups of conquered non-Christian people. The laborers, in theory, at least the way that Ferdinand and Isabella saw it, they were provided with benefits by the conquerors for whom they labored, namely the Catholic religion being one of the big benefits. Basically, the conquistadors were supposed to take care of them. It really didn't happen that way. Natives had to farm or work in the mines, and the fruits of their labor went to their Spanish masters, who in turn had to care for them. So, when European disease and brutality reduced the native population, the Spanish started bringing in West African slaves in what will be called the Asiento system. So this leads to a hierarchical and racially divided society in New Spain. So England now starts to pop onto the scene. John Cabot explores the coast of Newfoundland, northern Canada, in 1497. But England didn't do much better other than that until around 1587, when Sir Walter Raleigh established a settlement at Roanoke Island. Now, remember, Roanoke is famous because that colony disappeared. It's not a permanent colony, but it is the first, at least temporary, colony from England in the New World. Now, France. France set up a settlement in Quebec in 1608. In 1673, Louis Joliet and Jacques Marquette, they explored the upper Mississippi River. And in 1682, Robert de La Salle explored the Mississippi Basin, which he named Louisiana. Major land disputes are going to happen with Spain and France in the 1700s. Now, the Dutch, Henry Hudson, who had been hired by the Dutch government, sailed up what would become the Hudson River while looking for a northwest passage to Asia. This would become New Amsterdam in 1625, and then later New York. Now, the Spanish colonies in North America. Florida was established in 1565. New Mexico will be established in 1610. Texas is claimed in 1519, but doesn't really get colonized until the late 1600s or early 1700s. Really, Texas and its relationship with America will become important around 1848. California will be established in 1769. Now, the Spanish, the French, and the British treated the natives differently. Remember that the Spanish encountered the highly sophisticated and much more populous natives down in South America, Mexico, in Central America. So the Spanish made native slaves, and they brought over African slaves. The Spanish did intermarry with each, creating a caste system led by what quote-unquote pure-blooded Spaniards. And remember that notably, Bartolome de las Casas was a Spanish priest who spoke out against the encomienda system. Now, the French saw the natives as potential allies. They had by far the best relationship with them. They had much less stuff in the Americas, and they posed less threat. The French often intermarried to build alliances with natives. The Dutch did this as well. The French built trading ports throughout their territory and traded fur with the natives. Now, the English usually came in families, so they didn't intermarry as much. They traded ideas and crops with natives initially, but definitely viewed their culture as inferior. Natives were not as plentiful in the places where the English landed, so there wasn't much native slavery there. And there's going to be more on that relationship later between the English and the natives. Now, the natives, remember, were not and never had been one unified group. They could not organize a response to the encroachment of their land. Sometimes they traded with settlers. Sometimes they partnered with them to take out warring tribes, and then sometimes they fought them. But life will never be the same for natives after 1491. That is what is for sure.